Good afternoon. My name's Nick Shavers, and today I'm going to be talking about the Synoptic Gospels. So the word synoptic, it simply means to see the same. And so we know that the gospel authors were all seeing the same events take place, but each gospel writer saw different aspects of Jesus's life. They saw different aspects of the disciples and how they interacted together with people. And based on their own background, they were able to draw out different key aspects of Jesus's life, but also who they were speaking to mattered as to how and the style they were writing. So we know that the Gospels were not written chronologically, um, whereas, they would be as the events took place, but they were written more topically, like most ancient biographies. And so we see that all throughout the Gospels is the different topics of what Jesus did and how it was written. So we know that the Gospel of Mark was written first. We know that Matthew and Luke both likely had access to the Gospel of Mark when writing their own gospel accounts based on the information that's in them. But we also, historians know that there's most likely what they call Q, which is an anonymous collection of stories that historians believe that Matthew and Luke both had access to when writing their gospels as well. And then we also know that John had a very unique gospel that he shared. So let's look at it based on percentages. So 90% of the Gospel of Mark is found in Matthew and in Luke. But Matthew and Luke smoothed out some of the unpolished Greek of Mark's gospel. And so that's how we kind of know one way that Mark came first, um, because of the content and just how the Greek was smoothed out. We also know that John has 90% unique material in his gospel. And so, very interesting just to see the differences there. So let's look at how and when the Gospels were written. So the Gospels were written within the period of living memory. Now, this is important because the period of living memory, the writers have to be able to remember accurately the events that happened because these Gospels were written many years later. Well, we know that Mark was written about 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. We also know this is a very interesting piece of information that we need to take into consideration that the disciples, we know that they were in their late teens, early 20s, and medical research shows us that the best time frame for memory is during those years. You remember the most from those years. So it wouldn't have been hard at all for the disciples to recount these stories and really even remember, exactly what someone said. And, I think of if I went back that far from my life, I could easily remember certain key moments of my life and what somebody told me. So I know that it would be very possible for them as well. So a key to understanding when the Gospels were written and where people date many of the Gospels by these two different things. One is in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple. Now, no Gospel mentions this destruction, and it was something that Jesus prophesied. Also very interesting, the Acts doesn't mention it either. Another key event was Nero's persecution of Christians in AD 64, which is also not mentioned. So key facts like this help us to navigate when these Gospels were written. So Luke was likely written in 62 AD, Matthew and Mark written between 50 and 70 AD, and John written around 90 AD. Although it doesn't mention the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, many think that this was because John's focus was on historical events. Let's look real quick at the general structure of the Gospels. Each one starts off with a statement of Jesus' divine status. It then goes on to tell about the miracles and the teachings of Jesus. Then we see Jesus's betrayal, his trial and his death, the crucifixion on the cross, which leads us to the resurrection of Jesus and his encouragement and commissioning of his followers. So, what is the gospel? The gospel comes from an Old English word, Godspell, meaning good news, the story of Jesus. And the message of the gospel was the news that God's kingdom had come, bringing freedom, healing, and salvation to those in need. The gospel is both the announcement of Jesus, but also the enactment of Jesus. The gospel is a historical fact. It's providential, meaning that it came at just the right time, salvific, supernatural, available through repentance and faith, and accessible to all people.